Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the late start. Why isn't the director working as well? Let's try and fix that quickly. It looks like we might have just made it for the race start, which is a bit of a miracle. And it looks like my race director doesn't want to connect, which is a hindrance in the least. I'll be running through the order in a moment. Looks like we did have Van Wyk on pole though, followed by Venter. Morgan McCall has returned after his absence the last round due to load shedding, I believe. Followed by Johan van der Merwe as well in P4. Looks like they're off to a bit of a flyer. Conditions, as you can see, are tricky as ever. And we'll jump on board here with unknown, looks like AP. Well, Oosthuizen climbing fast. I'm guessing that's just the timing tower taking its own time to update, which we will get sorted shortly. There's a bit of a better switch, and there we are. Let's also try and sort out our HUD pages to broadcasting times. Now we do see them with the times down the list. Looks like, off my very short memory that I was able to see, the top four positions have remained unchanged on the opening lap so far. Of course, with the conditions as they are, you can see we expected a wet track, we have received a wet track, and then some. So these are going to be the true challenge for the drivers throughout today, is to master these tricky conditions. From what it looks like, the rain is sheeting down quite violently. So I can only expect it to perhaps improve. I can't picture it getting any worse than it is. That said, the weather could throw anything at us. But looks like the focus of at least the front runners in the starting few laps will be to try and get accustomed to the conditions in race trim and at race pace with a heavier tank of fuel, to avoid as many errors as they can and see if they can capitalize on other drivers making mistakes. While we do say that, it looks like Johan van der Merwe has jumped into P3, closely followed by Paul Venter. So that might have just been a slight error from Paul that let Johan van der Merwe past, but he isn't giving him any room so far. As you can see, a couple of, including a McLaren there, going quite sideways on the exit. And that isn't the friendliest chicane to get through as it stands already. So in the wet, and that must be an absolute nightmare to try and still hold your pace, get through there. As soon as the car gets airborne even slightly, that's going to come down even more difficult to control than usual. Right through the last sector as well, this isn't as straightforward as it often looks, especially coming over the crest to the left there. Most of these, if not all of the corner names here, are Belgian, or at least rather, to correct myself, are combination of German, and I think it is mostly they are German. But then I'm not even going to do myself the unfortunate attempt at trying to pronounce half of these, most of them ending in bocht, meaning corner or turn, but yeah, we'll leave the corner names to the experts based out that way. For now, we'll just focus on the action. Heading through turn one now. Paul Venter hasn't yet gapped, that is Paul Venter, yes, hasn't yet closed down that gap, which it looks like he lost out on the position. I can only imagine with an error, having given up that much space already, otherwise would be sticking on the back of Johan van der Merwe, who's managed to get some leg room there and get away, and perhaps even chasing down Morgan McCall in P2 there slightly. So it looks like the loser of the opening laps was in fact Paul Venter, who's dropped down 2 positions so far, but we'll expect these tricky conditions. Anything can change in a moment, in fact. As we look through the field as well, I see I can't make comments on how the qualifying went, unfortunately, having started and got home quite late myself. But then I see Nick Hodgson in an unfamiliar position in P11. Hardus Boyce as well, looking back a few more positions than you would expect him. And as well as Alex Buitendach down in P14. So you could possibly say that some of the drivers will struggle, as this is not their natural conditions, not in their element on a wet track, but this also could perhaps give the opportunity for others to shine and show their mastery of the conditions, to fully capitalize on drivers that would usually on a dry track perhaps be faster. Also, Zolder is not a track that is, let's say, natural in its characteristics, so there would be a lot of tricks of the trade to apply in order to extract the best lap times from the circuit. Each corner would be different here. I can't think of immediately of two that would be the same. Even the two chicanes, well, three chicanes we have, are very different in their nature. One even being a double chicane with a very tricky two apexes that are very tricky to maximize on, as well as an exit that you are constantly steering to get out of. As we see one of those chicanes now coming through there, we'll try and pop back down to, looks like Ryan Barrington Smith, as well as Endrin Govinder, apologies, are quite close together. There's not much separation there in the midfield from what we can see. As they come through the chicane, lining up nose to tail, a whole gaggle of cars coming through there. Very difficult to get the power down, of course, in these conditions, but also on this track, naturally, from the slower corners, you would expect that it's not going to be easy to earn an overtake. In a lot of cases, you may just have to rely on outlasting the pressure over the driver ahead in order to have them make an error and allow you a moment to slip in and get past. But for now, they are fully lined up without much separation between them. You could barely fit a car in between them in some cases. So we'll see how this progresses throughout the race. Looking right down the field, in fact, aside from one outlier rather of a 3-second gap, but in the top 20, everybody else is within 1.5 seconds of each other, or even less. And as I say that now, timing charts have updated for the top 5. There is some separation there. Hardest van Wyk, as we quickly switch to him while he's going down a straight to see the gap. Says 1.8, but that looks very short indeed when you can still see the car in your mirrors. He's done well to almost break a toe there, you can say, but seems to be the only man able to pull away comfortably at the moment, at least from the pack behind. We do see a bit of separation just under, well, between 1.5 and 2 seconds through the field as well. Morgan McCall, we know this man's got talent as well. We know he could do anything to bring that time back at any given moment. Perhaps one of his challenges is the wet weather, but we'll see how that progresses, as Johan van der Merwe also not looking like he wants to let anyone get away from him yet. He's sticking well within that range, or we can say striking range, of Morgan McCall ahead, and just waiting for any sort of slip up, pardon the pun, to capitalize on. And in fact, he has now come down to under 1.5 seconds on Morgan. So Morgan also dropping back on Hardus in the lead. So perhaps that the conditions are taking the toll already. Definitely hard to maintain over race pace on a wet track. You could say it's one of those few scenarios where you'll find it easier to get one lap pace in and nail that quali lap. But trying to get that right over multiple laps consecutively in a race is a whole nother level in the rain. And casting an eye further down the field, we don't see many position changes, at least none that are standing out to my eyeballs. I see Alex Buitendach has actually lost out on a couple of positions. That looks like is that Jude Neville that has that's for LT Racing as well, has jumped up a few positions from what I did notice earlier, so he's perhaps been the winner of some errors made by drivers ahead, but definitely earning what he's worth today, up to P13 now, but also with Fridge Finley less than a second, just over half a second behind. We see a spinner in the background. Oh, he's unfortunately collected a car trying to get his car out of the way, perhaps. Try and find out who that might have been while my cameras are taking a moment to update. Very long moment on that corner, in fact. Oh, we have some grass collection just ahead of Nick Hodgson. Is that not updating? We could in fact have a couple of back markers that aren't showing clearly on my track chart. I would be surprised. We have a whole bunch of cars coming into the pits though, so that that could have been from the damage accrued. It in fact was Nick Hodgson, I think, that came past and unfortunately collected. Who is that ahead of him? Try and see now as they do stop in the pits. That's Jason Luck, in fact. A return to racing for this man recently, so yeah, that's unfortunate. I think that crest over the after the first chicane over that hill is a bit tricky, and as the car gets lighter, very easy to lose it in these conditions. Just unfortunately in a part of the track where there are walls either side and very difficult to get the car turned around and also out of the way, as we see a shot of that area of the track right now. Aside from that, separation has started creeping in between the field. We still do see Paul Venter though now just under a second to Johan van der Merwe ahead, perhaps starting to make strides to earn back what he did lose in the opening lap. Having said that as well, I see Morgan McCall has found himself some space on Johan van der Merwe, but still around a similar distance between him and the leader. I can only imagine Johan's done himself a bit of wrong there by making an error, perhaps losing out on all the hard work he had done thus far. Also seeing Paul Venter close up to within that second gap. He doesn't want to let that happen again, especially being one of the men to gain a position in the opening lap. So he'll definitely won't want to be giving that back anytime soon. Looking back 2 places to P5, we have Jeremy de Villiers running for de Villiers Motorsport. He has probably the biggest gap in the top 10 now, yes, to the top 4 ahead, who have, you can say, pulled away slightly, but also pulling away from each other. The conditions and perhaps following may be difficult to do, especially I think what they would often train you to do is don't look at the car ahead, look through the car ahead, but with so much going on around you and the conditions to be worrying about, especially how much curb you are perhaps taking in some of the corners on a wet track, that's easier said than done in these cases. As we see a whole bunch of curb taken there, a little bit extra to spare. I would venture to say that is possibly one of the warnings that you'll collect on your way to a potential drive-through, is cutting any one of these chicanes too much. Of course, if we do see the tires leave the curb and go onto tarmac or grass in between, or even fully onto the green curbing, the green out runoff as we see it on the outside of the curbing, that often can earn you those warning points that add up to a drive-through over time. And checking in now to the front runners again, we see that Morgan McCall has closed a gap slightly now. He's taken off half a second off that time. In doing so, is also starting to gap Johan van der Merwe in P3 a bit, who has also himself started to get a little bit more breathing room over Paul Venter behind. I think this is clearly a race that we're going to see ebb and flow quite aggressively back and forth between the drivers, trying to find something to push, getting their tires up to an optimal temperature perhaps, especially in the colder conditions. Every degree really will help as far as tire temperatures go. The warmer the tires are, the more you'll be able to use them, although I think warm would be a bit of an exaggeration in conditions such as this. We can see though the track temp isn't too cold, while the weather is in fact. The rain will ease up towards 30 minutes from now, but the track temperature likely will not be able to rise until there is a dry line starting to form. We see at the moment track temperature is 20 degrees Celsius, which you would say isn't too cold, but at the same time not being able to keep the tires on a good pressure can easily see the temperatures plummet a little bit and come back to haunt them. Morgan McCall does look like he's on a bit of a charge, seeing if he can make up that time now. He's got that under the 2.3 second mark, and using the reference of Johan van der Merwe behind him, he's now also got that up to above 3 seconds. So he is doing his best now to catch Hardus. Hardus seemingly over 2 seconds ahead right now, has all the pressure off him and can focus ahead of himself on track. After the timing tower updated now, he's actually managed to add a bit more to that time again on Morgan behind. So we'll see if he can have a race this week where he doesn't run away with it a bit, but obviously that does rely on those drivers coming to the party behind him and placing a bit more pressure on him. 2.6 seconds seems like a lot, but in the rain that is not that much. That can be lost just entering the pit lane in fact, or even on your pit stop strategies, which is now brought down to 2.4 seconds again, has Morgan McCall. Pretty sleek livery, although having thought about it, I don't remember that I did check that off on my list of updating the liveries for this week, so I might well be missing his livery, although that would be quite a, let's say, a statement to have such a sleek black looking car if that is intentional. Clearly noticeable, and like an animal in the night coming up behind you, especially in the dark conditions. All you would see is the lights, no features of the car. So that could well be intentional, and in fact I'm going to go as far as to say it is, just for the sake of this race. And we still see the top four ever so slightly pulling away from Jeremy de Villiers in P5, with on my director at least showing that Peter Oosthuizen is in P5, but he is in fact in P6, who doesn't seem to be letting Jeremy get away either. So that is at least a positive for keeping Jeremy's race interesting. He won't have a chance to rest up, won't find himself in his own island on this track by the look of it, and Peter Oosthuizen is in fact closing up the distance now to just shy of a second, as we have Ryan Barrington Smith, our pace setter almost from last week. He had quite a few fast moments on Kota, last round rather, a few weeks back. He was one of the pace setters essentially, seemingly not in his natural habitat though, in the rain, or perhaps Zolder not being a strong track for him. Combination of the two could be the reason why we see him a little bit more off the pace today. Of course, also setting the car up for these conditions and this track is a much greater ask than it would be on paper. Just casting back forward again to Peter Oosthuizen, he's now under second and about 8/10 off Jeremy de Villiers, as it now updates to say 2 seconds. He may well have made an error going through the first sector there, because he has lost out on everything that he was slowly gaining on Jeremy de Villiers. Unfortunately, he's going to need to get back to work and start setting that up again. This is unfortunately the nature of the wet conditions, is you can spend all the time in the world putting in the effort only to let yourself down with one error, of course each error being magnified on a wet track. We see Hardus Boyce are hounding all over the back of Endron Garminder at the moment, possibly the closest in the field, and certainly chasing him down. He is all over his rear view mirrors at the moment, making sure it's well known that he is in the mix there. Just casting my eyes on some of these liveries, I would definitely say that they're perhaps not updated on my side, unfortunately, so apologies for that, although that won't take anything away from the action that we're seeing at the moment. Hardest Voicer looks like he could spend all day on the tail of Endrin Govender, but he's going to have to keep that pressure applied to see Endrin perhaps make any mistakes. He has been slipping back slightly, but I wouldn't expect he's been making too many mistakes to let Hardest catch up. Of course, characteristics of each driver are different in how they apply their drive style. We could have the fact that Endrin is spurred on by more pressure and in fact able to be pushed on by Hardest behind him. We do see behind them there's a bit of a gap, so the battle can commence and they won't be at risk of losing multiple positions. But having said that, I think Endrin will be doing everything he can to ensure that he's avoiding any errors, and he has so far, so that is excellent work from him. They come over the crest practically nose to tail, doing exceptionally well to maintain that composure, and right on the limits of the track as well, so using it all to make sure he can stay ahead. He's doing quite well at the moment. And looking up at the top of that tower, it does look like Hardest van Beek is starting to check out a bit. He's now got that gap over 4 seconds between himself and Morgan McCall, so that is quite something to put a statement down early on. We're only 13 laps into this race now, still an entire 54 minutes to go, so that is quite an early comfortable lead. And in fact, looking through the top 7, that is, well, almost, let's say the top 5 at least, that is pretty much the largest gap that we can find as well, is between P1 and P2, and then again between Paul Fent and Jeremy de Villiers, who himself, jumping back ahead, has found himself in a bit more space now, so he's put in the hard yards, done the work to get rid of Peter Oosthuizen behind him for now, and focus on what's ahead of him rather than be distracted by what's behind. Enough separation between the full field to be able to focus a little bit on this potential battle between Hardest Boyser and Endrin Govender. As we see, there hasn't yet been anything close to side by side, but I'd chalk that down right now to Endrin Govender doing an amazing job to make sure he's not giving an inch, let alone a yard, for Hardest to stick his nose in anywhere and try and make a move even, as he catches all the way up to the back of him and each deep brake zone, but then just does not have the speed and traction to be able to keep that gap, or distance gap at least, down enough to make any move into following corners. So Endrin Govender doing really well, even though he's letting the drivers ahead slip away slightly. Speaking of men in islands, Ryan Barrington Smith is, and Peter Oosthuizen in fact, are now starting to find their race already beginning to get a bit lonely, but to 2.5 seconds almost between them and the next driver. In fact, Ryan Barrington Smith is 3 seconds back on P6, currently sitting in P7 himself, and a full, almost, just about, we'll call it 6 seconds ahead of Endrin Govender and P8 behind. So his race is already starting to get quite lonely. As one of the pace setters last week, though, you never know what he could have in the bag. I said last week again in error, but you never know what he might have in the bag, and just, let's say, not showing his cards too early, perhaps carrying a full tank of fuel to try and make that up with a shorter pit stop. Only time will tell. And seeing that perhaps pressure is paying off slightly on Endrin Govender, because we are seeing Lawrence Stern has brought the gap behind between himself in P10 and Hardest Boyce in P9 down to 1.1 seconds, which is about half what it was 3-4 laps ago. So he's perhaps capitalizing, licking his chops, seeing 2 drivers ahead that may be battling, knowing that he needs to be there to be able to take advantage should they start slowing each other up, which they might already be doing just a bit. I think on this track, specifically, but even more so accentuated by the conditions that catching and overtaking are going to be two entirely different worlds, and getting an overtake done on regular race pace here is going to be very difficult. We only have one pronounced straight before the first chicane, as well as the pit straight perhaps, but you would say that the run from up to the first chicane rather is perhaps the best chance to earn an overtake on outright pace, coming round a faster corner entering that straight compared to the chicane going on to the start finish straight. Also going into P1 is a very difficult, let's say, it's already a bit of a man's corner, as the saying goes, but I would say to try and get an overtake down there as well would be especially gutsy, be it man or woman. That would be a heck of a hell of an inside line to try and stick the car down running at a pace through that corner as well. Of course, there's no runoff there. It's straight into the sand with you should you get anything wrong. And Hardus really isn't letting up on Endron as well. But Lawrence, who's ever so slowly closing that gap, I think he's decided he's seen enough of this up ahead. Nobody's made a move yet. It's time for him to get involved and see if he can make something happen. If he is being slowed down, especially by these two cars, I would understand he would be getting quite impatient, looking to almost send it anywhere to try and earn that position. And Endron perhaps noticing that gap coming down, because he's tried to put an extra tenth in, which will now update to under 3/10. So that is how we have it. Looking towards Hardus Boyce, he's going to find himself, or already does find himself, the meat in an uncomfortable sandwich, especially in the wet weather. So that's something he's going to have to live with or get done as soon as he can. As we notice, he does lose traction a little bit going through T1, so perhaps not in the perfect place with his car at the moment, and also perhaps the tires not in the ideal window that he would like them in, having to follow for such a long time. As he puts in a bigger tank slapper now, he's perhaps given Lawrence Turner a chance to go around the outside, going through the kink and heading up to the chicane. He has the inside line now under the brake zone. This is a double chicane though, so Hardus Boyce will have all the chance. He's forced a little to cut the apex, but he's going to have to give and concede the position now, with Lawrence Turner getting it done, taking the inside line, which gives you two inside lines of the three apexes through that set of chicanes. And he's done quite well to capitalize now, having seen Hardus lose traction twice. But now, can he get away from Hardus and chase down Endron Govender ahead? That will be the biggest ask for him now to achieve, perhaps being almost gifted that overtake with Hardus Boyce breaking traction. So now he really has to earn the time to get away from him and chase down Endron ahead of him. And if they will allow us just a moment to stick our eyes up ahead, we see Paul Fent has brought the gap down as well to Johan van der Merwe, also to just a couple of tenths there, and he's all over the back of him now. It looks like this would be time to start applying the pressure. Perhaps this is where a lot of the drivers that were able to keep a good pace going into the first few laps are now going to have to reach a situation where they've used too much of their tires to keep up that pace, and perhaps even struggling to maintain temperatures by driving as aggressively and fast as they were in the opening few laps. So we will see now the, let's say, a more conservative approach taking its effect, able to catch up to the back of a car now who is struggling more with their tires. All you have to do is bide your time in a way, as we can see Paul Fenter going left, going right, making sure he's not just filling the rear view but both side mirrors as well. He wants Johan van der Merwe to know he's there, to know he's coming back from that position he lost early on in the race. Good job as well from the back markers to stay out of the way there, leave it to the leave it to the leaders to have their little battles. So fair play and good sportsmanship there to pick the right place to get over to let it pass through easily, and stay well clear of the battle ensuing ahead. And now if these two will allow us just a moment to again cast our eyes a bit further back, we see Hydros Boyce is still within a second of Lawrence Sterner, or at least was starting that lap, whereas Endrin Governor has now put in a bit of a gap on Lawrence Sterner and Hydros Boyce behind him. So perhaps that's what he needed to kick himself into gear. See that if Hydros can't get it done or get alongside, then there's another car coming through now who certainly will take advantage of any slip-ups, and now he's doing well to crack on the pace and try and get away from the two behind, especially Lawrence Sterner, who seems to be working his way through this pack a little bit, one by one. And we can jump back a couple positions again to Jude Neville for LT Racing. He found himself less than half a second and still is now behind Hydros Boyce, who looks to be losing some time. I'd venture to say he is starting to struggle with his tires, having been comfortable on pace earlier, has now dropped a position and is at risk of losing another from the distance he is going backwards towards Jude Neville behind him now. And Jude, I know from racing with the man in the last season in simGT, he's one that is always ready to take an opportunity. So should you gift him an inch, he will take that mile and put you behind his rear bumper. So he's one of the worst guys you want right now to be hounding the back of you, because he's not going to let anything up, but himself needs to keep it consistent and clean. Just nail out his lines, as old Jim would say, apex and exits. Force him into the errors ahead, let the car come to you, and that's what he needs to do now. Hydros has been struggling. He can have that knowledge in his mind, at least can Jude, and he'll know if he can just keep applying the pressure, then perhaps this will come back to him. And something definitely would have happened with Endrin Governor. He's lost quite a bit of pace suddenly to Lawrence Sterner. So unfortunately all his hard work that he was doing, which we seem to just be missing most of these errors, he's unfortunately had that undone, has now brought Sterner to within a second of him, as he'll set to work again, trying to clear that time, trying to get back through the pack. And it looks like the P3 and 4 is still, well, they were under half a second separating, now just over half a second separating, but Paul Venter has in fact overtaken Johan van der Merwe, so he's earned that position back, and we've missed it unfortunately, but you know, with how Johan's been driving today's race, he's definitely not going to let that one slide easily. Finds himself in the position he started on the grid, but he won't be happy with that. He'll definitely want to be gaining back what he's just lost and closing ground to the rear bumper of Paul Venter. Head now sticks his nose out just to remind him he's there, but that's still a long way back to be making any moves, especially into a deeper braking zone with that chicane. He's going to have to stick to him though and earn it the hard way. And while these two seem to be pushing each other on with a bit of leapfrogging, they are catching the back of Morgan McCall as well, who is just shy of being 10 seconds back on the leader in Hydros van Wyk. So that is, again, amazing driving so far from Hydros. He seems unmatched today in these conditions on this track, but it's still a long race to go. We still have over 41 minutes of this race to come, and especially in these conditions now we'll see it start drying up a little. The clock does say that in about 10 minutes rain will actually start easing up from the heavy showers we are seeing to perhaps a more mild light shower. I wouldn't expect we'll see much of a racing line or a dry line forming, but it will of course make a few spots of the track far less slippery to be navigating, especially some of the curbing. The pooling of the water will start diminishing slightly with the lighter rain, and we can see by the end of the race it looks like the rain actually will stop. So at some point we are going to get that dry line starting to form, as we can now jump back to see that Lawrence Turner is now under half a second to Endron Govender. So it's fast approaching time for him to start thinking about another overtake. And Endron himself has also found a gap now between himself and P7 in Ryan Barrington Smith, increased to over 10 seconds. And what has happened with Hardus? Because he looks like he's lost a lot of time suddenly, at least on the timing towers, to Morgan McCall behind. And that is Hannes van Wyk. I do apologize. He had been doing exceptionally well to stay out of the lead, but he looks like he's lost a chunk of time. I dare not try for a replay now, knowing how it's treated me in the past, and not knowing how far we need to go back as well. So we'll avoid that scenario, but know that he has lost well over 7 seconds there to Morgan McCall behind. To be fair, has now put on another half a second to a second in the last few sectors, but still that does leave you wondering how he's allowed that to happen. Losing 7 seconds, I would imagine, is quite an error that's given you put your car perhaps the wrong direction at a chicane, especially perhaps. You see a little bit of separation creeping in between those two that work close together now, and it's perhaps that interval in the battle where you need to just start getting the tires back up to optimal to make another attack. But in this case, it could just as easily be difficulty trying to follow some of these cars through here. We see Paul Venter is still just ahead of Johan van der Merwe, and now starting to eat into time on Morgan McCall. He's got himself under a second to around half a second. Johan as well, only a second back. So if Morgan is starting to struggle with his tires, he's at risk of losing one, perhaps even two positions at the moment, with two cars chasing him down from behind who are gaining on him ever so slightly each lap. We see Paul Venter is now within striking distance, but how much of that pressure can Morgan McCall absorb? How much can he stay focused on keeping his eyes forward, not worrying about what's behind him, but also can he get back up to the pace he had that was pulling away? Because at this point it looks like Paul Venter's race is just coming to him more and more as we go. Seems to be finding more and more pace. And I'm caught between who to follow between these situations. As we see, Lawrence Turner is also less than half a second still behind Endron Govender, who, to be fair, has been absorbing endless pressure, regardless of the car behind him. He's done exceptionally well to not let give an inch or allow one single moment of an opportunity. We did not see him make an error earlier, but did notice the time loss. But take that away from him, and he's had a bit of a flawless race so far, able to stay in that solidified P8 for now. And we saw coming out of the first chicane as well that in fact it was Lawrence Turner who broke traction, and Endron able to stay stable and stuck on the road. And this battle could well be getting quite tasty. Unfortunately, Morgan McCall is starting to hemorrhage time We can see he's already up to practically 5 seconds behind Hannes van Wyk after Hannes made an error that must have lost him time, and we now see that both Paul Venter behind and Johan van der Merwe are both within a second of Morgan McCall, so he's not going to have any time to relax. It's now race as hard as he can, but as clean as he can to stay ahead of these two. Even a momentary traction loss, as we just saw coming out of the first chicane, that's going to give an opportunity to one of those cars behind. So it's something he's going to need to do everything he can to now avoid, certainly using as much of the track as he can. But he needs to maintain that pace, find the rhythm that he had earlier on in the race, which seems to have been affected by these two cars now catching him and applying that pressure. Could barely slip a piece of paper in between Morgan McCall and Paul Venter behind, as they are also coming up to a back marker, so this could well play, have something to play here. Morgan will be desperately trying to clear this back marker as quick as he can, as Paul Venter's almost stuck a nose up the inside there. He's constantly reminding Morgan and hounding him to remind him that he is right behind, and he's desperate to make a move. Is he getting alongside? Almost exiting turn 3 there, coming down the back straight. Is he going to get alongside now? It looks like Johan van der Merwe also reminding Paul Venter that he doesn't get a move on, then Johan might just come through and take the lot of them together. But this is excellent racing at the moment. I had to quickly cast an eye back to see that Lawrence Stoner's lost quite a bit of ground. He's lost ground as well as 2 positions without pitting to lose that time. So Jude Neville has jumped into P10 now to round out the top 10 with almost 5 seconds between himself and Lawrence Stoner. So Stoner has made an error somewhere along the line and has lost a lot of time as well as positions. He'll be kicking himself, having done quite well to clear through the field to get to that point. Casting an eye back, I see Hardus Boyser has actually pitted. Whether that is an early strategy call or was because of some form of damage, we won't be able to know for now, but he may well be trying to play the strategy call now, having seen he's actually now 2 laps back on the leader. So I can't imagine that was a short pit stop that's put him there, but unfortunately that's something, a pill he'll have to swallow, as Jeremy de Villiers has also pulled into the pits. If we will be allowed just a moment of reprieve from this battle for P3 or P2 rather, to see he doesn't look like he has much damage, just a bit of scuffing perhaps on the front left fender there, but definitely nothing considerable to notice. So that may well be the start of the strategy pit stops that are coming into play, but let's not miss out on any action right now in this fight for P2. Gloves are certainly coming off a bit, because Johan van der Merwe has now decided he's had enough of it. Perhaps Paul Venter having to start immediately go from attack on the front foot to defend on the back foot here, as just 2 laps ago we were seeing him look for a move on Morgan McCall, and just 2 laps later we are now seeing having to defend position from Johan van der Merwe, who is all over the back of him, trying to see if he can sneak an angle to make a line work into the final chicane. Will he try and go around the outside? That is not going to happen unless he is side by side. He's looking for a bit of a switchback, but the apex has been well and truly blocked out by Paul Venter there. Is he going to earn? He's earned side by side from what we can see. They're going down the pit straight into turn 1. He's looking to go around the outside. Can he make it work? That is a gutsy corner to try and stick a position in the wet. but constantly getting himself side by side. You have to say monumental defense right now from Paul Fenter, who's making sure to cover that inside line. It's much harder to find an outside karting line through the wet track in these GT cars. Of course, have you been familiar with Formula One or any open wheeler or aero cars, it's much easier to get that karting line going with increased downforce. These cars, though, is a whole nother story. It's all about maintaining weight transition and your momentum through the apex. Going around the outside only lands up extending the track more often than not. Gives you a greater distance to have to drive around that. But you have to say, you can see the timing charts say that at a stage at the last checkpoint they were less than a tenth that separated Paul Fenter and Johan van der Merwe. This is a mouth-watering battle, but you have to say at the same time Morgan McCall must be relieved to see some kind of pressure giving out for him to take a little bit of a breath and a little bit of a break from those two sharks behind him looking to pounce on the blood in the water. And with Jeremy de Villiers as well, that does promote all the positions from Ryan Barrington-Smith, who was in P7, right down to, that is, I was going to say Murray, but he's just pulled into the pits as well. So in this case, all the way down to Sean Loureiro in P12, who I can also cast an eye back to see that Alex Buitendach and Lawrence Stern are awfully close together at the moment, at least by the timing charts. On track visibly doesn't seem that way, so perhaps whatever was occurring between them has eased up, but there was less than a second separating Buitendach, Neville and Lawrence Sterner at the last time round. So perhaps one of the drivers giving an error that slowed up the other, but Jude is now being hounded by Lawrence Sterner. Sterner has got a lot to make up for. He's lost quite a bit of time now with the error he would have had initially, but now he needs to make this work. We can see some damage on the front of that car as well, so how much will that be affecting the car in the rain? With the downforce on the front end, that's obviously going to also have an impact on the tires and how long he can extend those front tires to give him all the grip that he needs. Just looking on the times between Paul Fenter and Johan van der Merwe, we have a bit of separation finally, so looks like we are back to being able to focus on one battle in Lawrence Sterner versus Jude Neville right now, as it is a fight for P10 on track and in position. And in fact, Johan van der Merwe has now pulled into the pits as well, so he's playing his strategy card as the earliest of the top four to do so. So we'll see where he does come out. If he can avoid some traffic, this might well come to play to his advantage. We see Jude Neville go off the track, going wide on the exits from the chicane, and that's lost him the position and a chunk of time as well. How much grass would he have also picked up to affect the tires going through the last sector, as Sean Loureiro looks ready to also take advantage of that, as we try and quickly jump to drive on board with Sean. He has in fact taken advantage of Jude Neville's errors and now got himself up into P12. Sorry, that is a P, saying a P10 on the bottom right, but P11 on the timing charts by the look of it. Johan van der Merwe has come out of the pits now in P7, P8 rather, so that is not a bad track position to be in. He's got himself in quite a bit of a time gap between himself, as he still drops back though. As he is now rounding turn 3, so that that is just the time charts, unfortunately taking a while to update. He's gone a lot further back than P7 or P8, but still finding himself in a bit of a gap, catching the... He will need to catch the back of Jeremy de Villiers, who in fact was a few positions behind when he went into the pits in P5, 1 or 2 positions behind Johan. At the time, they were, of course, battling for P3. So that is a net loss on time compared to Jeremy de Villiers, who he's going to need to clear if he's going to make up some of that time that he was hoping to perhaps undercut Paul Venter in position in P3. But at the moment, I would venture a guess to say that his pit stop timing was not ideal. He has lost time and perhaps a lot of track position, and will now only serve to lose more time if he is how that is an audacious attempt, if ever I did see one, to go back up the inside. That was in fact Jeremy de Villiers. I would say that was never a planned move, rather perhaps that was not Jeremy de Villiers. It was a car with green on them, but we are not going to find that easily now. Perhaps that was actually a back marker, in fact, or the timing charts again, the timing tower again is deceiving me with its late updates. Johan van der Merwe has in fact lost some time, unfortunately, and I think I found my green car. No, in fact I have not. It is a McLaren. And it is Gavin Scruton. There we are. So unfortunately, I think it was Gavin that mentioned in the simGT chat after the last week, or after the last round rather, that unfortunately every time I cast an eye on him in the previous race, he seemed to be making an error, going off track or losing time. And unfortunately that curse still seems to be persisting. My first sniff of him this race, and we've seen him collect the complete inside of an apex and find a lot of sand. So I do apologize for that, Gavin. Promise it's not intentional, but it's just the way the coin flips sometimes. Doing well though to certainly keep things going in these conditions, regardless of how many corners we have to cut unintentionally to get that done. And I'm trying to figure out ahead of them if that is a fight for position. My timing towers now, well, that is technically because Gavin Scruton is just behind, but that is also a very fast car between them. Gavin Scruton now going down the inside of, would that be Flip Fun Sale? Unfortunately my broadcaster timing tower seems to have completely broken itself. That was in fact Flip Van Salen. Oh, as we changed, we saw a purple car. Was that's Hannes van Wyk. That's the race leader. And he's going to have to wait for all these cars to clear now. So perhaps I wonder if that could have been the same corner he made the error earlier, because that looked at least to be quite a big hit with the wall. Turned himself around completely. He's back on track and going now. I can only imagine that the timing charts will take a while to update it, but if we look at the track map, that has allowed Morgan McCall to pass him, that has allowed Paul Venter to pass him as well. And in fact, he does find himself just behind. No, Peter Oosthuizen is just in the same car as him. Interesting camera work there. So Hannes van Wyk has now, as it's updated, dropped down to P3. He collected a big hit on that wall, so you have to wonder how much damage he is now carrying and going to have to fight through. But one would venture now that he has quite a bit of time to make up to get back to P1. Over 4.5 seconds between himself and P2 in Paul Venter ahead, who is a further 1.2 seconds behind Morgan McCall, who is now your new race leader. So that is over 5.5 seconds that he's going to have to make up with the damage he's carrying. Could we have seen him perhaps throw away the race lead? He's definitely going to have to put in a lot of sweat now to earn back what he had before, and you wonder if it's actually possible with the car he's now carrying and how much damage he has picked up. fortunately for him, it was only going to be a loss of 2 positions, even with his long venture off the track there and into the wall, that there is quite a gap between what was Paul Venter in P3 at the time, now P2, and Peter Oosthuizen down in P4. So it's allowed him at least one, let's say, slight positive of that whole situation is he hasn't yet slipped off the podium, but how much that's going to affect the rest of his race, only time is going to tell, as perhaps now this has spurred some new life into Paul Venter, who realizes that it's not just the podium up for grabs for him now, but perhaps even the race win if he can track down Morgan McCall, apply some pressure, and perhaps get an overtake down on him. See, now the pressure resumes. He seems to have been all up in the mix today, has Paul Venter. He was perhaps the let's say the largest loser of the front 4 runners in the opening laps, but he's earned his right all the way back to a potential race win if he can keep this battle ensuing between himself and Morgan McCall up front. Morgan, to be fair and to give the man some credit, he has absorbed a lot of pressure today as well. We have noticed, perhaps just from default of having the camera eye on him quite a bit, we've noticed a lot of braking traction, especially in his rear tires, having to try and stay ahead of these guys, but perhaps that's also just a sign of how much he's trying to drive that car on his limits at the moment. And while Hannes is certainly closing up the ground, he's not lighting the track up at the moment as he was before. So it is going to be hard for him to track down on Morgan McCall, Paul Venter, having also not seen any of the current top 9 entering the pits. One would go as far as to say that Hannes is going to need to carry that damage the rest of the lap, the rest of the race. For now, it does seem like he can maintain a pace to do so, but also the more the tires wear, how much more difficult will it be for him to get the new tires up to temperature once he does get into the pits. We are starting to see increments of a dry line forming now, as it has in fact stopped raining, and now it will be about how fast that water can clear off the car. We're already seeing the, let's say, natural sheen of the surface starting to show, so the water is clearing. There is less of a spray that's being kicked up, just slightly in some cases. That will also allow, and he's shot off into the pits, has Morgan McCall. So he's decided the time to pit is now, and to get rid of those old tires, get the new tires out now. The track perhaps has got enough on it and a lot of the water clear to be able to now make full use of that, and perhaps capitalize and take as much advantage as he can, trying to clear some time and ensure that he can perhaps retain P1. We're also seeing Peter Oosthuizen come into the pits now, from running P4 at the time. We'll also see where Morgan McCall finds himself back. You would venture that he should come out in the top 8, depending on how long this pit stop may take. We also have to wonder what on earth has happened to Johan van der Merwe. Seems like 2 different drivers have been in the car before and after his pit stop. Can't notice any damage on the car, so I can't imagine anything happened for him to go into the pits earlier than expected or planned. as we see we're down to just 16.5 minutes now of the race remaining. So it is crunch time. Those that are going to pit need to get that done and out of the way now. Oh, is that Gavin Scritton again? He seems to enjoy taking some grass, but now perhaps that was just a misjudgment on the closing speed, making sure he was avoiding hitting the car ahead as he dives into the pit lane to now take his one race strategy pit stop. But on the timing charts, just to go back to what we were just speaking about, Johan van der Merwe has lost a lot since he's come into the pits, both on time and on pace. So that is unfortunate to see. Jeremy de Villiers will be quite happy about that, because right now he is looking to be quite a large earner once the top of the field completes their pit stops as well. He was, if we recall, running a comfortable P5 for a long time, but with all that's happened recently, will he find himself closer to a podium spot perhaps to chase down? This is going to be the time of the race now where the track is starting to dry up a little bit more considerably. There is still a minor rooster tail of spray coming off the rear tires, if we can notice that. But that isn't going to be nearly as much of an impact as that was in the opening stages of the race with the heavy rain. Track temperature has climbed though to 21 degrees, so that's going to give the drivers some hope that they can really start pushing and getting some more out of these tires for the closing stages. And there we see Hannes van Wyk is now pulling into the pits. We're going to try and keep an eye on how long that pit stop might take. I'd expect he's hopefully going to avoid having to repair anything, perhaps just carry the car back out with the shortest stop as possible, and see if he can maintain the race pace that he was having before, well, after the incident rather, before he's gone into the pits at the moment. But this is now going to be crunch time for Paul Venter. This is where he needs to show his absolute pace, get everything out of the car and what's remaining on those tires as he can, because the time that he takes now between now and going into the pits is going to be what makes or breaks his chance at taking this race win. He really is going to need to put in some flyers to be able to both get enough ahead of Hannes van Wyk, who looks to have Hannes van Wyk, who looks to have completed his pit stop, yes, and he is exiting the pit lane now. So we'll see where he finds himself coming out, as we have Morgan McCall, who is rounding the third corner already. So that does put him ahead of Hannes van Wyk. We'll see once the timing charts update, but we can see him quite far back there, perhaps more than he was. In fact, Sean Loureiro, who is still yet to pit, does find himself between those two. So that is and in fact Jeremy de Villiers, the man we were just speaking about, who has in fact already found himself as a winner of a few positions. If we take into account that all of the four cars ahead of him that have yet to pit, the fifth being Paul Venter not included, but the four cars ahead of him after their pit on net timing before Jeremy went into the pits, you would think they should all find themselves sitting behind him, and Jeremy certainly would have a shot at a podium now, of course barring anything going wrong, and should he be able to maintain his pace. See Fridge Finley also coming into the pits now, so that will leave just four cars remaining, apologies, in the top four that are yet to enter the pit lane. They are leaving it very late, in fact, as well, as we're approaching the last 11 minutes of this race. So let's hope they haven't forgotten that they still need to enter the pit lane at least once and put a minimum of a litre of fuel in, or a fresh set of boots, whichever the case may be. So Jeremy, now we see, has settled into P6, but still with those few cars yet to pit. He's found himself ahead of Hannes van Wyk, clear a full 6 seconds at the moment. And Paul Venter defiantly still marches on, avoiding that pit lane at all costs at this point. I've seen quite a few drivers cut that second apex by a good margin, so I have to wonder just how close to the line that is, or how many of them are perhaps at risk of any drive-through penalties so late in the race. As we see, Morgan McCall has put up the fastest time of the race, and he is on an absolute charge now. As we see, he looks like he's cleared a Lawrence Sterner quite comfortably there. Lawrence unfortunately has not made back much of the time that he had lost earlier in the race, and of course with the perhaps possible repair of damage once he had entered the pit lane, that's put him further back than he expected. But back to Hannes van Wyk, in fact, who has immediately responded to set up a new fastest time of the race. So perhaps that's his answer, that he is going faster with some of that damage being carried, even if the track is drying, on a lighter tank of fuel, no less. But he certainly is ready to respond immediately to Morgan McCall's charge up ahead. Does he have enough time though to be chasing down the drivers in front? He's already taken off 2 seconds of the time between himself and Jeremy de Villiers, but catching Jeremy is one thing, making up the almost 12 seconds between Jeremy and Morgan McCall is a whole nother thing to get himself back into the fight for this race win. But let's also not forget Paul Venter, who's still yet to pit, but was comfortably looking like a charge for the win might be on the cards for him tonight. I'm not sure staying out and extending is the optimal strategy though, having known that the tyres will be quite worn in this situation. Any driver who's taken on fresh tyres on a drying track will be at a much greater advantage now than extending a stint. And we see him once again past that pit lane entry. He's having none of it. Perhaps borderline disconnected from his pit wall at the moment. Not listening to anything they're saying. They must be screaming for him to come in. But I think he's also then made the decision to not be taking on a fresh set of tires, not being able to get the full use out of them if he comes in with less than 10 minutes to go. And I unfortunately don't have enough of the experience, although I was desperate to put in a few laps in the wet last night in ACC to see what the difficulty level was like, what the tire wear level was like, just to use as a reference. But unfortunately didn't get enough time to make that experience happen, to know just how much the tires would be affected. I would imagine that temperatures wouldn't so much be a problem, at least on the high side. Therefore degradation wouldn't be as much of an issue, should you be able to keep them up to a reasonable temperature and maintain pressures as well. We won't have to worry about any graining. So in this case we definitely would have the tires able to last, by my expectation. But whether you're able to make the full use out of them for an extended period of time is a whole nother story. And we've just gone under 7 minutes now to run in this race, and Paul Venter once again puts a pit entry behind him. So he stays out. He is leaving it extremely late here. Haven't been watching the times close enough to know how much he might be losing. other cars behind. But you would think at this stage it looks to be at least a bit of a time loss to Morgan McCall. Hannes van Wyk has cleared Jeremy de Villiers, but finds himself just under 15 seconds to Morgan McCall up ahead, currently running in a P4 on track. But of course that is currently a net race lead. If he has been putting in more positive lap times than Paul Venter has been doing, extending his stint currently. There we are, as Endrin Govender and Ryan Barrington-Smith both enter the pit lane. That is going to leave Paul Venter currently on track as the race leader, as the last man in the top 8 to enter the pit lane. Is certainly leaving it late than never, but we'll need to see him come in very shortly, and I can only expect that he won't have any time after that to be chasing anything down. So he's leaving it all out on track at the moment to see. And as I say that, he finally does enter the pit lane. So this is going to be interesting to see where Morgan McCall is on track. He's coming over the crest and into the third chicane, double chicane. Exits third apex, and now he's out. This will be once he rounds this kink, will be flat on the throttle right down to the last corner, last sector rather, that he'll be entering as he rounds the it's close enough to call that a hairpin. That is technically the third chicane on the track. Yes, third chicane on the track, although it's taken flat out. This will be the fourth and final corners. And it looks like Paul Venter has already left the pit lane. He's rejoined the track and he is still in the lead. That is sensational driving from him. We won't see the timing charts update, at least for another sector. But just on distance between himself now rounding or entering and rounding P3, Morgan McCall is only rounding P2. Turn 2, sorry. That would be turn 4 versus turn 2. So that is quite a distance that Paul Venter has managed to get in, and a very short pit stop. So he had obviously made a decision before the race already to be taking on as little fuel as possible and not changing tires perhaps. And that has given him the race lead now. He's seemingly earned back everything that he lost on those opening races, opening laps. You have to give it to the man though. He's driven really well to not let go of that bone from losing the so many positions early on. He's driven back to claim that rightfully as his own, as we have now had the full field pit. Unfortunately, Murray has been in the pits for laps now, so I think that's either going to have been a disconnect or an early retirement. But while it still says he is yet to pit and complete his pit, he has retired the car quite a few laps down now. And Hannes van Wyk can still give himself a shot to close down for a podium, but that is about the best he can ask for at this point. And that also will have to be practically gifted to him by Ryan Barrington-Smith, who will be doing everything he can to hold on here. Now 2.5 minutes left to go in this race. That should be another 2 laps essentially, having the leader having crossed the line already, but he stuck it down the inside quite early. I think unfortunately in that case Ryan Barrington-Smith knew he didn't really have the pace to be fighting Hannes for that last podium spot, but a bit sad to see. But at the same time, a P4 is a very good result for him, having been running quite quietly in a almost silent P7 for the length of the race until the pit stop started ensuing. Having said that, he's also done exceptionally well to maintain times and pit stop to stay ahead of Jeremy de Villiers, who has driven quite well today. Had a decent few in laps and out laps. He was one of the earlier pitters, so perhaps not able to take full advantage of the track conditions at the time, having pitted so early. But then he has been well and truly outdriven at the moment by Ryan Barrington-Smith, sitting in P4. And a full 13 seconds clear as well of Jeremy de Villiers in P5. We look back, Peter Oosthuizen, at least on the timing chart, said that he was within a second of Jeremy, and there we are. Now that it has given us a clear indication, he is again trying to stick his nose around the outside into the final chicane, but that move's never on, unfortunately. And in that case, too easy for the drive to close the door on the second apex. Although it looks like he's earned himself a move along side by side. He's nose ahead as they cross the line as well. So it looks like it should be one more lap to come, but he's got himself up into P5. Jeremy de Villiers, unfortunately, not working out for him since the pit stops. And is that also Johan van der Merwe that snuck ahead of him? I think it is. Oh, he's been mugged for 2 positions in the space of 2 corners in that case, and he just seems to be suddenly going backwards in quite an interesting race line from Johan van der Merwe. But that won't be enough to cut the track, just to slow him down. He's stuck. Well, I don't even think we can call that sticking his nose out. He's just letting Peter Oosthuizen know, I'm here, you better be going fast for the last few laps. Eyes ahead though to the race leader Paul Venter, as the time has ticked down to 0. We do see the checkered flag come out, and that is a great win for Paul Venter. Morgan McCall also crosses quite close behind him to take a new fastest lap for the race. So he did make up a lot of time in the end. I would venture to say that he's made up an exceptional amount of time after that pit stop, quite a few seconds. So either maybe Paul Venter coming off the gas slightly or slowing down a bit. Looking back, the fight for... That's not P3, that is P3. Fight for P3 is no longer on. The fight for P4, though, sorry for the delays, is already over. So we have Paul Venter taking the race win. Morgan McCall in P2. They did really well today, especially Paul Venter. In fact, Morgan McCall did so well to absorb all the pressure early on as well. Hannes van Wyk rounding out the podium in P3 then for the race result today. And I will also hope to see a couple of these podium sitters, if not all of them, jumping into the chat shortly. Believe I have fixed the issue that we had with the interviews last time out. And there we have it. So that was our race result from Zolder. Congratulations to those drivers. I don't see any of them yet popping into the off the podiums into coming into the booth yet. So hopefully we'll see them join us shortly. Although that was really an amazing drive from them. And in fact, we do have, looks like we're going to start with your race winner today. That is Paul Venter. And Paul, how did your race go? Tell us about it. Congrats on the win.
Oh, thanks, man. That was yeah, that was quite I'm stressed, I'm shaking, I'm soaking wet from sweat. No, that was hard work, man.
No, excellent drive. It seemed like I did get a very rushed start in the first few laps, but it seemed like you lost a couple of positions off the start in the opening lap, but you've certainly earned all of that back. So great drive in the end.
Yeah, man, noob mistake, pulled off, and as I pulled off I realized I'm on map 8 So yeah, jumped to map 1, but by that time I had two cars flying past me as well. I was looking for reverse, and then yeah, just had to get the nerves settled and play the long game. And yeah, I thought Hannes had it in the bag, and then he had 2 spins, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, then that brought it closer. And then yeah, this dry spell, which was not expected. We were actually with like 12 minutes to go. We were like, should we pit now? Take slicks. What should we do? And my teammate Ryan, he kind of did the calculations. Was like, no, you'll be out in front by about 15-16 seconds. Just stay on the wets and just survive. And yeah, I mean, take the win by just over 1 second. That's the way I like to do it.
No, it was an excellent drive in there, and there was certainly a time where I was even looking at it going, has he forgotten to pit? Is he ignoring the pit wall? What's going on here? You certainly left it late, but you can say strategy played to perfection. Morgan did close the gap to just over a second in the end, but like you say, taking the win by a second, looks like it all went according to plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Zolder is my most favorite track on ACC, so last year I put it in the wall while fighting for the lead, and this year thankfully I kept it out of the wall. So yeah, this is a good one for me.
Good stuff. I don't see any of the other podium sitters coming in yet, so I'm going to bother you for a few more questions. The next one being though Bathurst as round 4. How do you see yourself faring at that track? What are your thoughts on it? Another one of your favorites, or rather the mountain is daunting?
Yeah, no, I suck at Bathurst. Absolutely, just never finish the race. I always die. So I think for me, probably just going to be try and not die and just finish the race and get some points from it. Yeah, that's but I do love Bathurst. You know, even if it does murder you 9 out of 10 times, it's a fantastic track to drive. So yeah, looking forward to that one, because that's always the drive to survive, and whoever doesn't hit the wall or hits it the least amount of times is normally the one that walks away with it. So yeah, that's my looking forward to that.
Very, very well said. And I think a lot of drivers feel the same about Bathurst. Never one of their favorite tracks, but a very rewarding track, should you be able to keep it clean for the majority of the race. And you're often given that reward for a good drive as well. It seems like you're going to be the only podium interview tonight. So thank you again for the time, Paul. Great drive for the win. So very well earned. And I'll see you at Bathurst in 3 weeks' time.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, man. And thanks to SRSA. Great race, great everything. Now to grab a beer and go watch the stream.
Yes, you certainly deserved it. Well earned. Take a break and we'll see you in a couple of weeks in.
Awesome. Cheers, bad.
Cheers, buddy. And there you have it. That brings to a close Zolder in the wet. Quite a challenge for the drivers, but they gave us some good action there. Showed us that those that were able to avoid the mistakes could make it pay. Paul Venter leaving it late till the end, but claimed the victory quite accordingly, and certainly a good drive. Hannes van der Weyck unfortunately had one big error that cost him, as we saw. He was out in front by himself, but that's as much of the challenge. Is when your race is a bit boring, you've got to keep your eye on the ball. Just leaving anything to chance can come back to haunt you in the end. And then of course for Morgan McCall, a great drive to finish P2 in the end as well. He was one of the men involved in the action right through the race, so really well earned. A shout out to a few of the runners further down as well, fighting for position P10 and a few of those later positions. There were some amazing battles that we saw ensuing. I'm going to give let's say an outside of the top 5 driver of the day to Endrin Govender, who also absorbed a ton of pressure there. So that'll do it for Zolder tonight. Catch us in 3 weeks' time. We are going to be attempting to conquer the mountain. Mount Panorama in Bathurst is as was mentioned now, it's a challenging track, but one we love seeing drive, one we see so much of a challenge being extracted out of the drivers, where they really need to do their best. So looking very forward to that one, and can't wait to bring you that action from us tonight at SRSA and the podium, especially my one podium interview for tonight. Thank you again. Great drive from all the drivers tonight. Take care. We'll see you in 3 weeks' time.